bear with me, if you will. I'll try to stand during this. We'll see, I might have to sit down. But anyway, I was going to write some cards, but we ended up, because they wanted a handout, we ended up writing a whole, basically my speech is written down, and I'll kind of deliver it as it was written. Often in my journeys around with Native peoples, they ask me, "Are you an Indian?" And my response is that I often jokingly respond that I am a full-blooded wannabe Tabate Pomo Indian. But if you look underneath any patina of tan that I might have on my skin, I'm just the right shade of pink to be called white. My great-grandparents came across the Oregon Trail in 1852, so we are, we are part of the initial people. How'd I write that? Oh, it's on the wrong page. How'd I write that? So I am a descendant of the intruders responsible for the demise of 80 to 90% of the California original people that anthropologists claim to have been amongst the most peaceful people in the world. That's California Indians in general. Through archaeological undertakings, we have been shown that Native peoples have lived in Anderson Valley for some thousands of years. An archaeological exploration on Mill Creek in Philo claims that the site was under continual occupancy from just under 5,000 years ago until a point sometime before Europeans showed up. There was no metal, glass, or ceramic found in the dig. On Fish Rock Road, beyond Ornbon Valley, an archaeology exploration on the Zini Ranch claims that on that village to be an important trading route to the coast, and it dates back 3,000 years. One account has the first contact from outside coming with a troop of Russian explorers who traveled through the Anderson Valley to the ocean before establishing a fort in 1812. It seems one Indian was wounded in that encounter. In 1836, Spanish troops made their way into what is now called Ornbon Valley, not far above and part of the Yorkville Indian community. Later that same year, they returned, this time pushing into Anderson Valley. They seized several young Indian men and took them, presumably, to use as slaves. The following year, 1837, they returned, capturing young men as they went. But this time, the story has it that the local native inhabitants knew what to expect and were hiding in a bush. And as the Spanish troops made their way out of the valley, they picked off a couple soldiers from the rear. A Spanish sword found, I believe somewhere in Boonville, might be evidence of that encounter. It does seem that put a stop to the Spanish forays into Anderson Valley looking for slaves. But other Spaniards came and stayed, picking tracts of land here and there to build their houses. Some brought families and many didn't. They raised sheep and mostly horses, for which they had an easy market in the South. There are mixed reports on how the Indians got along with Spanish settlers. Most white people claim having a good and friendly relationship, while the Indians told of many brutal encounters. Young Indian women were often seized for sexual purposes. Effie Santiago, a Rancheria Indian we will hear more about later, told her granddaughter, Violet Rennie, that the Indian people continued their cultural practice of tattooing the faces of their girls, in part because this seemed to revile the Spanish men and keep them away. Maps by Kroger, Heiser, Brown, and all, either supported by or based on the 1908 ethnogeographic work of S.A. Barrett, indicate the following major village sites in Anderson Valley. Latte, on the west bank of Rancheria Creek, about 1 mile from Yorkville. Lemcolil, on the north bank of Anderson Creek, 1 mile down from Boonville. Tabate, near the northeast bank of the Navarro River, 2 miles west of Philo. And Catuuli, 50 yards south of the pioneer village known as Christine, close to what we now call Navarro. A map in the back of Barrett's book shows that the Indians of Yorkville spoke the central Pomo language dialect, while the native of Anderson Valley proper, Boonville, Philo, and Navarro, spoke northern Pomo. The Russian River Indians referred to the coast Indians as Westerners, or Boya. The people of Anderson Valley were known as the Bokaya, or people of the West. The Catauli, Tabate, and Lemcolil people were called Padatea, or downstreamers of the Boya. The Rancheria Indians were called Donokea, or upstreamers. The native Navarro River got its name from the Indians. They called it Nobada, adding beta, their word for creek or river. This naming of the Navarro might have applied all the way up to Yorkville at the time, and indeed, what we now call Rancheria Creek. Today, the Navarro River starts in Philo, at the confluence of the Anderson Valley and Rancheria Creeks. An old story tells how the ancient people of Lemcolil ate the flesh of a monster and turned into deer. 2 people only, a brother and a sister, did not eat the monster and remained human. They lived over the mountains southwest of Boonville, west of Rancheria Creek. They were wild people, but did ordinary people, deer, no harm. They taught others the proper and respectful way to hunt, and would capture any who hunted improperly. There's also a story about a little pond that was once found below a spring not far from Catuuli. It is said that the coyote made this pond because Frog Woman would not allow him access to the spring. Some later ethnographers referred to Anderson Valley Indians as Comanche, Pomo, after the headman of the Rancheria Indians. One even suggests that Camchi, a small town some 20 miles north of the lower reaches of the Navarro River, as being named after Comanche. Often names take on different spellings and pronunciations as they are passed around between English, Pomo, and Spanish speakers. Such reckoning probably came after northern-speaking Pomo of Anderson Valley died or moved off to reservations, and the lingering Yorkville Indians migrated west as they found work amongst the growing European settlers. Besides the above-mentioned villages, there is evidence that there are many others throughout the valley. The Indian people probably moved as roads or houses were built too close, but they never moved far unless it was to another Indian community. Personal experience, as I have hiked the valley, has shown me that many of the villages aren't recorded anywhere. The evidence is in the form of mortars, metates, pestles, areas of massive amounts of obsidian, and chert chips, arrowheads, and other cutting and scraping tools, and most telling, the house and sweat lodge pits with the surrounding rings of earth. In 1959, Bobby Glover, he's an old-timer here, or an old-time stalwart, counted 13 house pits on a flat above the upper reaches of Indian Creek. Each pit had been scattered with shells. The site was just below a large rock covered with deposits from a spring. The site was later leveled by loggers for a log landing. Other members of early white settler families have shared their memories of Valley Native peoples. Charlotte Gowan remembered a village that was most likely Tabate, a short distance from Philo. She remembered Indians from Ukiah passing through on their way to the coast. Beth Tuttle remembered a community on the north side of Anderson Creek, just west of Old Broomville. She also remembered seeing a slab barkhouse on the side of the knoll above Indian Creek near Philo. Based on the works of S.A. Bett, this was probably the remnant of a settlement called Comda. Both of these women shared their most lasting memories were the constant wailing of the Indian women during Indian funerals. The name Rancheria was given to all Indian communities by the Spanish, and for some reason the name stuck with those of what we now call the Yorkville area. Most of what we know about the area comes from a singularly alluring book titled Indian Summer, written by Effie Maccabee Hulbert. Effie, born in 1878, was the daughter of Charlotte Louise Clounce and John Watson Maccabee, who settled in the Yorkville area in 1859. Effie was their first child. She grew up in the Yorkville Rancheria area and had a close relationship with the Indian people there. Her book includes many stories that she was told, in addition to first-hand knowledge and memories. Much of what follows was prodded by Indian Summer. In her book, Effie Maccabee Hulbert referred to the Indian community in Yorkville as Rancheria, and the native peoples as the Macumaks. Kroeber and al. Refer to the principal village in Yorkville as Latte, but Effie never mentions this name in her book. The head man of the Yorkville Rancheria was named Comanche, thank you. Knock a tooth out here. The head man of the Yorkville Rancheria was named Comanche by the Spanish. His Indian name was Bakea, which appears to have been abandoned even by the Indians themselves. The native people of the Rancheria called the author Effie Maccabee Hulbert Muchacha. Rancheria and the adjoining Ornbon Valley was not only a separate area from Anderson Valley proper, but was also a separate Indian community, and documented by the early white ethnographers. They spoke a different dialect of the Pomo language. Central Pomo was spoken in the Rancheria area, while Northern Pomo was spoken throughout Anderson Valley, Broomville, Philo, and Navarro. Because what we refer to as the South Coast falls into the Central Pomo language group, Rancheria interaction and trade was much more prevalent with those neighbors than with the Northern Pomo speakers neighbors in Anderson Valley. There was much intermingling, even marriage between them. One family of the Coast Kashaya Indians, referred to as Bushy Ridge, were especially friendly. Two sons of their headman, Santiago, married two daughters of Comanche, headman of the Rancheria, Macumaks, and they moved to the Rancheria. Effie Santiago, mentioned earlier, was the daughter of one of those unions. She was named Effie after Effie Maccabee Hulbert, author of Indian Summer. Sometime in the early 1880s, Charles Hope, a coast rancher, died, and the Bushy Ridge natives living on his ranch were asked to leave by his heirs. It was decided they too would move to the Rancheria. In her book, Effie shared that there were about 100 Indians in the Rancheria in the mid-1880s. One may assume that the 1850s slave trades out of the county greatly affected the Macumac Indians, because government documents list 180 Indians that were taken from one or two Mendocino County Rancheria communities to the Mendocino Reservation for, quote, their own protection, unquote. The official 1880 census of the U.S. puts the number at 67 for the entire Anderson Valley, which I assume includes those residing on the Yorkville Rancheria as well as those in Boonville, Philo, and Navarro. Many of the names in the census match the ones of by Effie, but there are many others besides everything else, my eyes go crazy. But also there are many others talks about that are not on the census. So one can assume the census is a low count, which makes sense that, the natives like to hide if they could and stay uncounted. Effie mentions that many of the young were dying, and most of those that remained were old. The census shows 23 of the 67 were 50 years old or older. So maybe it was the older ones that kept themselves from being counted. Again, that makes sense. The old lifestyle continually dwindled, as did the people themselves. By 1900, the Anderson Valley Township census lists a total of 30 Indians, though again, certainly some went uncounted. The sadness of this figure is compounded by listings such as Sue Santiago, mother of 4, still living 2. Mary Kaltai, mother of 5, still living 1. Molly Comanche, mother of 5, still living 0. One outbreak alone, apparent measles, recorded in Indian summer, took the lives of 75 Macomic Indians. The 1910 census lists only 16 Native people living in the Anderson Township. In all 3 of the censuses, the names found, I think I mentioned this before, on the census documents are consistent with the names in Indian summer, so it's possible to trust their veracity. In 1883, a deed was filed in the Mendocino County Recorder's Office, which transferred a tract of land from Dick York to Comanche, chief of the Rancheria Indians, and Santiago, chief of the Bushy Ridge Indians. Effie Maccabee Holbert's account says her grandfather, Dick York, gave the land to the Indians to keep them from being forcibly removed to a reservation. Vida Grenick, the oldest living Pomo that lived in Anderson Valley, was told by her grandmother, Effie Santiago, that a fire had destroyed some of the records of the deeded properties. She asked me what I might know. At the Mendocino County office, I found the original 1883 deed, mentioned above, from York to Comanche and Santiago, which was followed by several other transfers of the property. In 1900, Santiago sold his half-interest to his son, Johnny Santiago, referred to in the recording as sub-chief of the Bushy Ridge Indians, for $5. On July 14, 1903, the County of Mendocino sold the property to the state of California for taxes due in the year of 1887 in the amount of $1.12. The county apparently valued the property at $55 at the time of the sale. A handwritten note in the margin of the deed says that the property was redeemed on January 16, 1909 by I.L. Preston. The meaning of this notation is unknown, as the name doesn't appear on any of the deeds I located. On the 23rd of April, 1909, the property was transferred from W.W. Irish to Billy Dock, captain of the Yorkville Indians, for the amount of $10. Again, there's a gap, as nothing shows when W.W. Irish obtained the property. On November 15, 1928, the property transferred from W.M. Dock, known as Billy Dock, and his wife Belle to A.N. Berger for $10. On November 23, 1928, a court judgment showing Billy Dock as plaintiff and Charles Koch as his defendant. Charles Koch et al. And his defendants stated, defendants have not, nor have either of them, nor have the estate of Camacho and Johnny Santiago, either of them, any rights, title, lien, estate, or interest in or to said real property. In 1930, A.N. Berger and his wife, Wanda Berger, sold the property to James A. Sager and Bertha May Sager for $10. I believe that the property is still owned by them today. And that's true, I think. The following excerpt found on the final pages of Indian Summer further sheds light on why Billy Doc decided to sell the property. During Muchacha's mother's last illness, Billy Doc came to her about selling Yorkville, and that my eyes, excuse me, getting old. That grandfather York had decided, let's start that over again. This is a quote, during Muchacha's mother's illness from the book. During Muchacha's mother's last illness, Billy Doc came to see her about selling the Yorkville land that grandfather York had deeded to the Indians for their lifetime. And then this is a quote in a quote, because this is Billy Doc talking. I know Dick York say, indeed, for the land he want it back when we done with it. But maybe you let me sell it. We need money to fix our house in Hopland. I come to tell you, we can't live at Rancheria no more. No work here. Muchacha's mother told him he could not sell the place, as all the heirs of the York estate would have to be consulted first. She reminded him that half the land belonged to the Santiagos, of whom Johnny's daughter, Effie Santiago, was the only one left. She might not want to sell her share. Until after her mother died, Muchacha did not know that Bill had visited her. When she learned that he had sold the Yorkville land, she still had the deed to it and intended to taking the matter up with Bill. But before she had an opportunity to see Bill, he had passed away, and she would not make trouble for Belle and little Joe. It was exciting to find, this was exciting for me, to find that most of the remarkable Pomo basket weavers listed in the book, Remember Your Relations, the Elsie Allen Basket Family and Friends, co-authored by Susan Billy, whose grandmother was named Susan Santiago Billy. The list includes Elsie Comanche Allen, Agnes Comanche Santana, Susie Santiago Billy, and Susan Billy. Other names in the basket weavers with ancestry from Yorkville Rancheria include Rhoda Summersall Knight, Ethel Knight Burke. Friends would include Annie Burke Lake and Lori Fish Summersall. While these world-renowned basket weavers didn't live in Rancheria themselves, their ancestors did, and thus lives a wondrous legacy of a much unnoticed segment of the Mendocino County. In conclusion, I would like to say that while Indian Summer is a remarkable peek at early Anderson Valley Native history, acknowledged by such by Malcolm Margolin, creator of Heyday Books and News from Native California, while he was quite effusive on reading the copy I gave him, it was agreed it is not without shortcomings. After all, it was authored by a white European, as were the other works I have referenced today. These works don't reflect the feelings, the emotions, and the reality of day-and-day life as experienced by the native peoples of Anderson Valley. So, that is why it is such an honor to have with us today the great-great-granddaughter, and I wrote a great-granddaughter here, but she's actually the great-great-granddaughter of Effie Santiago, Elizabeth Knight, who, along with her friend and historian Jeff Burrows, will take over this reminiscence of bygone era and bring it into the present. I now give them the mic, and you will enjoy their stories, I'm sure.
Hello. Oh. Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay. My name is Elizabeth Knight. I'm the daughter of Adrian Knight and the great-great-granddaughter of John, Frank and Effie left. I'm not a speaker either. And writing this was really emotional for me because of what's happened to my people, but I'm going to try to get through this. Can't see. The Effie, the daughter of Johnny Santiago, and Frank, the chief of Ukiah Rancheria. I grew up here in Anderson Valley. Just like my relatives before me, our family was the last Pomo family to live here. All the others moved away, got sick, or worse. Effie and Frank got jobs on the June Ranch, picking hops, apples, and other fruit. They raised their children, Alice and Marcus, their grandchildren, Violet, Arthur, and Elizabeth, and their great-grandchildren, Sandra and Beatrice, on the June Ranch. After old man Harwood June passed away, Arthur moved his grandmother Effie and family to Philo, where they resided and raised my dad, Adrian, and his sister Alicia, and eventually me and my brothers and cousins. Where the post office sits today, that's where the house was, in Philo. Art got Effie a cabin on Blattner Road, where he and his wife Lila, my grandmother, would go take care of her for a long time as she aged. Effie passed away at the Ukiah Hospital in 1975 at the age of 87. Frank died of an illness in 1962 at the age of 76. Frank and Effie were hard workers, and working for the Junes became the beginning of a friendship that would last for many generations to come. Harwood June had given them a cabin to raise their family. The June Ranch is right down the road from here, across from the cemetery, where they're all now buried. They picked apples, but Effie also traveled, sometimes at night with the kids, to deliver babies for other Pomo families, mostly on the Point Arena coast and some in Ukiah Valley. Effie spoke all 7 Pomo dialects, and Frank only spoke Central Ukiah Pomo and broken English. Effie had friends all over Mendocino, Lake, and Sonoma County, and probably family. She would go visit, such as Annie Lake, Annie Burke, Mabel McKay, Elsie Allen, world-famous basket weavers and medicine people. Elsie Allen is actually my grandfather's godmother. Effie and her daughter Alice were also known to make beautiful baskets. Those are placed in museums like Grace Hudson and others across the nation, possibly worldwide. My mascara. They dug sedge root from the Navarro River in Navarro and gathered gray willow for their baskets. Violet also made a basket she gifted to a friend, because that is the rule. You give away the first basket you ever make. Me and my brothers, Arthur and Jacob, made baskets that we gifted our mom. Today I brought a basket for my son made in class, and he gifted it to me. It's in the little room. I should check it out. It's really cute. Effie and Frank were very traditional and raised their family that way. They prayed in the roundhouses and sang healing songs. Effie taught all the kids Central Ukiah Pomo, but my grandfather Art knew all 7 dialects as well, and he could talk to any Pomo. That's what he says in this book, his interview. Effie's English was very broken, and this made it hard on the kids, Violet and Art and Elizabeth, when they went to school here at Con Creek. They had to work extra hard because of the language barrier, but they were hard workers and very motivated at a young age, and they made it through. Violet was the first of the family to graduate high school and college, and that was a big deal in those days for Native Americans. Effie and Frank showed the kids how to build a lean-to when they were little, a structure made of willows and sticks down by the river in the summer to stay cool. They ate salmon when it came upstream. They went to Point Arena for abalone and seaweed. They harvested acorns from tan oaks, their favorite oak. That's what Aunt Violet said. They ate acorn mush with deer meat and torts. They were very traditional. It's like Aunt Violet said that. She was like, they're very traditional. I spoke with her last night. She is my Grandpa Art's sister. She's still alive. So my Grandpa Art talked a lot about catching rabbits also. I think they were his favorite food besides acorn mush. Their family was close-knit, always laughing and joking, but it wasn't always so easy. There were signs on stores that said no dogs, no Indians. In Ukiah, it was very segregated. Grandpa Art said that Boonville treated him no differently, just like one of them, but Aunt Violet had a different experience, not so pleasant, and that made it really hard on her. But they persevered and continued to pave a way for the future generations. It probably helped that my Grandpa Art was an outstanding baseball pitcher. The fastest all around, they say. His catcher had to wear a piece of rubber in his mitt so his hand didn't hurt and swell up. Grandpa became a backhoe operator, and he loved it, and he enjoyed the challenges and excitement of it. Him and Smokey Blattner developed most of Anderson Valley, lots of properties, roads, septic systems, and ponds. He worked 38 years running backhoes, and later ran backhoe for Dean Titus. Some old-timers say that Art was the best at running Smokey's old beat-up equipment. He mentioned that he always wondered if he might end up digging up his ancestors, and then he'd laugh, make a joke out of it. Grandpa and Aunt Violet kept the traditions alive. They showed us where to pick our medicine for tea and willow for dream catchers. They taught us some language and traditions. Effie taught my dad how to chop wood when he was a little boy in Philo. She was just a small old lady with a big old axe. She told him to follow the lines on the wood, that's where to chop. And when she did, the wood just fell apart. She made it look easy. Afterwards, even though his sister said Grandma doesn't like little boys, Effie always treated him to a slice of pie. I learned to sing our songs from my Aunt Alicia. We traveled California in a dance group with my cousins and my brother Jake. I graduated from Sherman Indian Boarding School in Riverside, California. I attended DQ University in California, a tribal college that specialized in Native and Chicano culture, where I studied basket weaving and Native art appreciation and history. I have made many Native friends along the way over Indian country, and I continue to learn and grow and teach. But we wouldn't be here without the hard work of my ancestors and my parents and my grandparents and our friends that we now call family, the Junes and their descendants. So here's my friend Jeff Burrows. Thank you. Yahweh.
Wow, that's a tough act to follow. It is indeed it's an honor to have been involved with your family all these years, and our family considered your family. We were all just the same. It was a wonderful relationship we've always had. I had a whole bunch of stuff that I'd written and I've been going over here, and really I don't want to take away from this moment. I think that so far what we've heard here is wonderful work by David, with all the different dates, times, and all the things that were happening there. It's just amazing how much he found out. And Elizabeth comes along and touches our heart with what her family has been through all these years in this valley. So I know that there are stories that Sherry was wanting us to go back and forth with, and I can't, at the time, I'm going blank. So I think when we go to the questions from the audience and everything, the whole stories will pop up. So what I would just like to say, I'm going to forget all this stuff about the dates and times that they found around here of when it was first settled. And I'm going to go right to what I wrote that I think ties in, to the emotions that Elizabeth has given us. When it comes to our modern day understanding of what life was like for Native Americans before contact with white settlers is at best an educated guess. I'm talking about the highlights, the rituals, the ceremonies that so predominantly saturate the landscape of written records. Of course, deep down, we all know that these things were not how the Pomo people lived their day-to-day life. I cannot stress enough that we, the audience of today, cannot even begin to understand what it was like to have lived during the time when the Pomo people were the only people living in and around Anderson Valley. It must have been a beautiful place. Streams filled with salmon in the winter, deer and elk grazing the grasslands in the spring. I hope all you can appreciate the significance of what I'm saying. These people were living, breathing human beings, a people in touch with their surroundings and at peace with nature. Then, who, for lack of a better word, were violated, mistreated, and so abruptly torn away from everything they held dear to them. Their world was turned upside down in just a matter of a few years. And the life of a peaceful people, a way of life that had been lived by them for thousands of years, would be gone in a flash. So it is important for us to take this into consideration, that these people suffered unimaginable tragedies, and that this preservation of what small bit is left of the culture that we hope to have done here today as a directive to honor the people that we know as the first people of Anderson Valley. Today, let us acknowledge the Pomo people who have passed and those who are still with us, like Elizabeth and her family, and give them the honor and respect today. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to open it up now for questions, and I will be bringing you a mic because it's hard for them to hear.
All of the missions in California were heavily affected by the Spanish missionaries. Did they make it up here into the Pomo Valley, and did they affect the environment of the Pomo Valley as drastically as the mission areas were affected?
Oh, I can say as much as just to the one story that I had written about years ago, and David touched on it earlier. There definitely was presence here. I think it was Vallejo and the missions that were built down in Sonoma County. They came up and procured the young men to help build these missions. And far as the one contact that I know of is the story he told, where they came up the second time, and when they did, their effect here was not as strong as probably the tuberculosis, pox, things like that, that just by making one contact could have devastated half the population easily. But they fought back. They came along and they picked off the last couple of soldiers at the end of the train that was heading out of here. They ran over that hill just opposite of us now, where Rankin Rickard found that sword from them fleeing from that area. So their influence came in at the reservation out there with the names like Santiago and so forth. And from what I can tell, that is the only influence, that little bit there and there. And if anybody has anything to add, do you have anything to add to that?
Does this? Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. The Spanish named the Rancheria area Rancheria. They named Yorkville area Rancheria. They also named the headman of the Rancheria Indians Comanche, from the Indians they knew from the south, the Comanche Indians. So those are two lasting influences. But as I pointed out, the whole lot. The Spanish were very much involved with the early adjustments that the local peaceful people that were living here had to go through, and they were certainly partly, responsible for the diseases that were brought here that caused so much death and destruction. So,
Did they try to establish a church or anything like that in the valley that you know of?
A church or anything like that was never built.
no. There,
Talking about soldiers.
there, yeah, there is some talk about the Christian religion coming in, but no real established whatever.
Yeah, that wasn't an issue.
You talk about Art and Smokey Blattner. He worked for Art was a genius with equipment. Him and I worked together, and when I go down to Smokey to get gravel, I have to wait till Art to get there to start the machine. Nobody else could start it. He put his white shirt on, and I meet him at the bar on Saturday night.
Thank you all for a great talk. I have a question about the Pomo language. Are there some people who still speak that language? Has it been recorded, studied, written about? Any information you have about the language would be useful.
Do you want to answer?
Yeah.
I can answer that. Hensi Wamitani, Keshi Lori Lewa Thomas. I will be teaching Northern Pomo at Mendocino College in the spring. I'm from Point Arena, but I'm also Liz's cousin. My grandfather's from Yorkville. My dissertation, one of my chapters is on Yorkville. I'm enrolled at Hopland though, and many of the Yorkville people have been absorbed into these other places. As far as the Spaniards, that question earlier, they didn't really come up here very much, and you won't find this anywhere in any book, but my great-great-grandfather, John Boston from Manchester, said that when the Spanish came up here, they told them what was up, and they killed them.
Yeah.
They would kill them dead, chop them up, sew them up in a deer, and throw them in the ground, and they never bothered us anymore. I believe that, and they didn't wander as much as they did. I mean, when Cabrillo tried to go up there humble, oh my God, those guys almost beat him to death. But the Pomo language, Yorkville is a central Pomo, and a lot of the people here from the Boonville area are northern speakers, but the majority of them have been absorbed into other tribes where they also too speak central. But you can learn any language you want. So I'll be teaching it at Mendocino College in the spring, and I hope to be able to add more classes to it and teach others. I'm a central Pomo speaker, but I could speak Stewart's Point, a couple of words in Eastern for my husband's language is from. But yeah, we're bringing it back.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Could you speak to the agricultural practices? Was it organized? Did they plant fields, or did each individual family just have their own little plot?
David, agriculture. Have any kind?
Is this it's still on? But the hops was big at one point. The white settlers put in hops, and the Indians were backing them up. We use a lot of Hispanic people for our farm labor now. Back in those early days, when the white settlers first started coming, they used the Indians for their labor, and it had to do with growing, different. There's talks of watermelon patches, there's talk of corn patches, but hops was a money crop. I don't know. I can't tell you more about agriculture than that. That the Indians themselves probably did not practice. Theirs was they were more hunter-gatherers out there gathering what was there, and what they did some practices like burning and stuff to kind of enhance, get rid of some of the bugs and enhance this and that, but pretty much didn't have agriculture as we talk about it. And that didn't come until the white settlers came. But when it came, it was certainly here. I don't know if that answers that.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too that it was acorns became a staple for them. And if I'm reading my own writing correct, if you don't mind, I'll just read this real quick. This is the Anderson Valley Archaeological History. Inhabitants settling here to near 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. These groups would have been somewhat nomadic, meaning they would never inhabit an area for more than a short period of time, as food resources will become scarce for that region. But eventually the inhabitants would make more permanent villages because of one key fact, and that was the introduction of a plentiful supply of acorns that grew in and around the valley. Considered to be a good source of vitamins and protein, are more understood as a meal similar in nutrition to that of wheat, with other groups in Europe and Asia were involved in a more agricultural influence by life. Processing the acorns from the 3 or 4 types of oak trees in the valley that would have been dried, then ground down into a paste, and then the tannin acid leached out until it was edible enough to eat. So that is about as far as I know that agricultural, any kind of agriculture was. And you don't have anything to add? It you never heard any stories? Okay, hope that answers your question.
Yes, my name is Yoriko. I'm with the Land Trust, and so thank you for the great talk. On this last topic, actually, the Land Trust did help to host Bernadette to come do an acorn workshop at Galbraith Preserve this last spring, and maybe we'll do it again next year. So I have 2 questions. I guess one is on the language. And so evidently we're kind of at this border between northern and central Pomo, and the question is, were they able to speak to one another and how different the languages were? And also, I know the Pomos they're kind of scattered up and down the coast and to Ukiah and down to Hopland and such. Is there any one central place where the Pomos kind of have a museum? Maybe this would be a question that might be related to our visitors today from Mendocino County as well.
David, you want to speak to that?
I'm not sure that I really heard the question. Can somebody?
Is there a site where there's native Pomo, the Pomo have that is centralized for all meetings and places to go now? There isn't really.
I think
What Lori's doing, yeah.
Lori would know that better than
Could
me.
you answer to that, Lori?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Regarding the language about northern and central, they're very similar. The ones who are like, here's an example. My dad didn't speak English till he was 7. He spoke Kashaya, Stewart's Point language. And so they would say, "Hey, Ansi wa mitoni? How are you doing?" In Yorkville, it would be, "Simoma, how are you?" In northern, it's Sintama. And then in eastern, my husband's language, it's Hekatama. So those are the differences. Southern and central are probably the most similar. Northern and central are most similar. Southwestern it's like being on Mars. And Elam, I couldn't figure it out. All I could say was E aholita to my husband when he would talk, because I couldn't understand him. They're very different languages. But the central have 4 dialects. You have Yorkville, Yokeo, Hopland, and Point Arena. And then Point Arena has 4 subgroups within that. And then all of these groups have subgroups within them. And they have a little distinct way of talking. It's just like sometimes some families even create their own way of talking. So it's really unique, but you can still understand each other, So that's what I've noticed about the language. My dissertation is actually on Central Pomo territory and the connections between people and place through language and stories. And so that's why I was working on the language here in the Central Pomo area, which is what I grew up learning how to speak. So yeah, we got a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of people interested. And when I'm teaching at the college, it will be open to everybody. I have lots of students. I currently teach Native American history at Mendocino College, and I also teach political science and ethnic studies.
And can I add something too? Also, as far as language goes, we have here the Bootling language. And the Bootling language is not really a language, it's a lingo. But there is a word in the lingo for someone who's embarrassed is a Charlie bald or Charlie. And that goes back to a Charlie bald who she introduced me to, Sal Martinez, who then let me in on a secret that they didn't know that he had a word in Bootling named after his great-grandfather, I believe. And then in talking to him, he said that's funny because we have a word over here on the coast that we use, effied. It says someone has a stern face. And my mother was a little girl running around in on the June Ranch, and she would go in and out of the house of Frank and Effie. And one day she came in and there was a big burlap sack full of acorns that that Effie was going to process, I believe. And my mom, being a little girl running around, she started digging in there and she sensed the presence. She turned around and guess what she saw? A stern face. And that was Effie. And that's how those kind of things can get started. But it's a great little, cute little story.
I just want to say that in this book, Indian Summer by Effie Maccabee Hobart, she talks a lot about the difficulty of understanding each other with the mixture, as I mentioned in my story, of the English, the Spanish, and the Indian language, that they kind of made up their own language in the valley that was a mixture of all of those. And so she makes quite a point in that in the book.
That's true. It was a hybrid language.
Yeah.
This area does it to people. I don't know. All the different languages.
We've heard a lot about the connection between Ukiah through Anderson Valley down to Point Arena. I'm curious about why it doesn't just go down the Navarro River, and also what was going on in Albion.
Oh, that's a whole other animal there.
I'm sorry. Tell me what
I'm not really sure. What's your question?
I can't hear that well.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's and this is probably for Lori and Liz mostly, but we hear a lot about the connection of Central Promo from Ukiah down through Anderson Valley down to Point Arena, and it actually seems if you just started walking from here, you'd more likely follow the Navarro down, which is closer and a nice valley. And then there's also Albion, which is a very rich harvest site too, and we don't hear very much about the Native American presence in either Navarro and Albion. I was wondering if there's a reason for that I'm not thinking of, that I can't figure out, or what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I know that
Those are very hard to find. Anything on elk, anything on Albion, anything I found. If you go to the Native American Heritage Commission website, it's a state agency. Online they have a genocide map. It's very difficult to read. I opened it up and I cried my eyes out because it was killing logs of soldiers and vigilantes who were traveling through, coming in from Martinez all the way in through Calistoga and Napa, coming in through Middletown, coming in to Upper Lake, and then heading on up to the Bloody Island Massacre, which then they went out to Potter Valley afterwards. Then they came down the river to the Rush River and they slaughtered 75 more. One of them was my great-great-great-grandmother, when she was with her daughter. They were killed there. So yeah, it's hard to find information. I did find stories though about some of the first Indian white contacts up in Mendocino, which is really rare and super interesting. Very difficult to read. You have to sit there and decipher through handwritten copies online, but it's the Native American Heritage Commission. If you go to their website, there's a ton of information, and you could basically select each county and just start looking for it. The most documented sites, of course, are going to be Round Valley, which is where they marched all of us to, but they also marched our Indians from Ukiah over to Fort Bragg, and they didn't follow roads, guys. These were hard walks. Saloma Alcantara was one of the famous basket weavers from Ukiah, and I interviewed her sister, Jeanette Holder, who was one of the last Eastern Pomo speakers, and their grandmother had walked from Ukiah to Fort Bragg, and in the Pomo language, she was saying, as a little girl, she was saying, "Please God, don't let us go with this white man. Please God, kill this white man so he won't take us. Please God, help us." And then she said something really weird happened. They were crossing the river, and I don't know if it was the Navarro or the Russian or what, but it just said that the soldier who was marching them, his stick that he was using to cross the river broke and impaled him and killed him right on the spot, and they all ran back to Ukiah. And that's how Saloma Alcantara lived and grew up to be one of the biggest Indian doctors who doctored the doctors. And so I think there was some divine intervention there because
For a moment, anyway.
oh yeah, for their particular story of survival, anyways, right? But yeah, that was an interesting story.
Oh.
I wanted to just share one story with you because I love telling spooky stories. I tell my students all the time and freak them out, especially Mountain View Road. But
Yeah, that's where I grew up.
coming over on the Ukiah Boonville Road, I thought of one in Soda Creek. So my grandfather was Jeff Joaquin. He was from Yorkville. He was a little badass. He was very, always in trouble. If you read his unofficial autobiography down at UC Berkeley, he talks about how he was a very mischievous little boy and often got in a lot of trouble. Anyways, he tells of how his grandfather was actually kidnapped by Mexicans and taken deep into Mexico for 7 years, and it took him 7 years to come home. When he got home, his mother from Yorkville had passed away, and he was a 15-year-old boy, so he went to go live in Hopland with his dad's people for the first time. But they used to talk about going over to the coast to go get salt and seaweed, and you would have to ask for permission to cut through people's territories. That was the standard practice at the time. But like I said, he was very mischievous, and he didn't always follow rules. And sometimes he snuck through at nighttime. And he said the place by Soda Creek, I just drove through it. I drive through that little windy area of Soda Creek, with those big rocks on the side of the wall with all the holes. There's little people that live in there, and at nighttime they come out. And so he said when he would cut through that part of the trip, that he would run like hell. Run like hell through there, because those stories are everywhere in all tribes, especially places where you have trails and roads with rocks and high banking walls and cliffs right along the side of them. They were considered very spooky places. And so those are the little people from Soda Springs. And the reason why I know that is that drinking water, the reason why they call it Soda Springs, Patty Smith she used to be the cook at the senior center in Ukiah, and she told me, she goes, "Oh, when we were little, I used to hate to go over the coast. That was such a long ride." And she said that, but the best thing was stopping at Soda Creek to drink soda water. She goes, "Oh, that water tastes like soda." It was so sweet. The mineral makeup is unlike anything in the world. So those are the little people from Soda Creek. So next time you go through there, you're going to see all those little holes and all the rocks. That's their little houses. And I bet the little people down by Squaw Rock or Matakawokabe, Frog Woman Rock, are probably really mad because they blew up their homes. They put that whole, that whole side wall in over there down by... Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to share that.
And the same thing happened here.
Lori, is that like 4 miles up? Are you talking 4 miles up?
Yeah, that's the Soda Creek, yeah. Yeah, there were holes.
Yeah, that
my
was
mother
Jeff
said
Lucky.
that there were holes, bigger holes at one time there, right by the bridge. And that on Ed Singley's ranch around the corners where she's talking about the Soda Springs were, she said that there used to be a walkway that went across the creek right there at the main house of Ed Singley's, which is about 3 miles up. and you would walk across it with ferns, and it was dripping, and it did taste good, she said. But when the highway department came through, and that where the bridge is, they blasted a lot of those, and you can see those holes now. And my mom talked about the same thing of hearing stories about little people. But my mom says, well, I'm little too, so I can go up there and talk to them. But she never told me if she ever did. But getting back to the original question about down along the river and the redwoods, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but from what I can understand, the redwood groves down there were thick and dark, and you couldn't really. You may have a temporary encampment during maybe when the salmon were coming up, but there are no villages kind of that have been documented between, say, the Carlson site in close to Navarro all the way to the coast. And then Albion has a rich history that Thomas Layton, the archaeologist and anthropologist that came up and did a dig there in Albion. I believe that's available somewhere. Anyway, so there was groups there on the coast, of course, all up down the coast. But that section through the redwood groves was probably, it didn't have a lot of oak trees, it didn't have a lot for the nuts, and it didn't have a lot of berries. And it was been a really temporary thing. So there were no villages along in the dark redwoods.
Hey.
Right, there was the road used to go up over the Navarro Ridge, but as far as the Indians were concerned, they didn't care about the road. They had trails, which the Mountain View Road supposedly follows almost every foot of it is followed the old original trail.
Hey Jeff.
Mountain View Road.
Jeff,
Yeah.
when Jan and I moved to the valley, we moved into the Prather house there in Philo.
Right.
And right on the right side, on the Rays Road side, was a big oak, a big deciduous oak, Oregon white oak, I guess it would be. And it pointed sideways down towards the confluence of the creek and the river. And we were told, probably by Bobby Glover or maybe Smokey or Art, that was a directional tree. Had you heard about trees that were pinned down early on in their life and pointed the way to, like, the pathway?
I have heard those stories of other tribes across the nation that did use those, especially in the mid-east or the south, some of those places. I'm not sure if I read anything about it, but that was the practice for the trails in order to lead to certain areas. They would pin those limbs back, and you would end up with this.
Yeah. This was actually the whole tree. It's just
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right between the two houses there, right by the gas station.
Yeah, I can't add anybody add to that. The trails. But those were markers that were used by Native Americans in different areas. It very well could be.
What? Were the little people different than the relatives? Yeah, there's all kinds of little people. There's little people this big, there's little people this big, there's little people this big. I've seen one that was this big. And I almost lost my mind. That was in Laytonville. The scariest reservation in the planet. Laytonville.
Do you have another question?
Yes, I do.
Sorry.
I work for the county of Mendocino, and we had to learn about Indian child welfare, a lot of it. And a lot of people here probably don't know this, but a lot of the white people asked the Indian people to stop teaching their kids to speak Indian, but to speak in the English language. And back in the day, a friend of mine, her grandmother was taken away because they wouldn't do that, and they took him to Covelo, and they had him in a building and tried to teach him English ways. Did you guys have that around here where kids were taken?
My Aunt Violet was taken from the family by welfare, and I think that was hard on her because she didn't know a lot of English. But I don't think they forced it here, and probably it was only our family, so it would be only a few Indians, if anything, that would have to learn the English, but they did it on their own. They weren't forced.
Okay.
But maybe in Ukiah, probably.
Well, yeah, the
that's
person
what
I'm talking about is from the Hopland tribe. It's her grandmother.
Yeah, see, we're trying to narrow this down to the Anderson Valley and how unique it was and is. So the stories that are outside in the Ukiah area are going to differ. Like Lori was talking about, there was just these little. It was so amazing how different some of the areas, culture or the language was. So we have to take into account. We're talking about your Alice, which is your great grandma. She unfortunately at the age of like 41 or 42, she got tuberculosis, and it took her way too young. And as far as I know, my mother told me that my great grandfather Harwood June, who was a judge as well, he worked with trying to get the kids adopted by a family local in the valley so she could stay here. And I know that she did finish out her high school and everything here. So those kind of tragedies the stories are everywhere. But here, just a few that I can think of that are documented. Another question?
I've got one.
Okay, he's got the mic.
Brad Wiley, Navarro. Thank you all. What a stunning presentation of the first settlers here in the valley and all over the county for that matter. It's something that those of us who are lucky enough to live here in Anderson Valley should want to know more about. And I think you created a foundation for all individuals and institutions to learn more about the Native Americans and their achievements and what they've contributed to our understanding of the world. And I want to thank you for that. But I also have a question for, I'm not sure who, Elizabeth or David, but with respect to the contemporary landowners in Yorkville, I'm thinking of the Hyatt Ranch on the left side of Yorkville when you're going toward Cloverdale, and then Guido Pronzolino's place where the old Murray Stubblefield ranch was. Where exactly was the pre-European ranch? Did I do that?
Dave did. David, I think you could answer this question since you did all the...
Yeah, where was the rancheria?
Well, they moved all around. They weren't stuck in one place. But if you're asking where the property that was deeded to them, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Or where the rancheria...
Okay. Pardon?
Where the rancheria itself sat.
No, the rancheria was the whole area. That's what
The whole area.
Effie points out. It wasn't here. It was the rancheria. It was everywhere. But that plant that I say that it's still in the Sager's ownership. You'll have to excuse this old brain of mine. But as you go toward Cloverdale, on the right, what's the name of that road that goes? There's a road that goes.
Hibbard.
Is it Hibbard? Okay, well then it's Hibbard that used to go to Guido Pronzolino's place. Okay, well Guido's place was on the left, and this goes down and it goes up over a hill and then down. That hill that it goes over is the 50 acres or 70 acres that was deeded to the Indians, that is owned today by the Sagers. There's a beautiful, beautiful spring on it, just gushing with water. It was the last time I was there, and that's their place. Yes, they did spend some time on that, but they just didn't move into there and stay. It's just because they owned the property kept them from being put on a reservation. So, but they still moved around. In fact, Guido even told me about sweat pits and house pits and stuff on that flat down lower, closer to the river than that. So they were all over, and they talk about Milk Ranch, and they talk about this and that where they moved around. But where I just told you is where the deeded property is.
Hello. So I just have a question about, because it's a small small community. People have lived here a long time. What do we do when we have arrowhead collections or mortar and pestle collections or artifacts? What is the appropriate thing to do with them?
Write down where you found them, right off the bat.
Or should we
Then
give them to
donate them to-
somebody?
I donated all my stuff here, and
Or maybe Lori would have an opinion. Museums.
so that the public can see. Yeah.
Or the tribe, there's no, well, there's people from here who are absorbing.
I just will throw this in on that question because I've asked the same thing and I get different answers from different Native peoples. Some people say, "Oh, keep it," and others this or that. Personally, when I have been finding the mortar bowls and and different stuff as I walk around, I just kind of scoop it up and stick it back in the ground. I don't even take it. I don't want to deal with it. I did move into the house that I moved into had a collection, and that is still in my possession. We don't have any more mortar bowls, but we have pestles and a matate, and they're still there. And I use the matate to make my acorn mush. So.
I was told that the one of the place where our old village site in Yorkville is, when you first come into Yorkville, you see the city limit sign. Right off to the right there is that little Christmas tree farm. Right up in there is where Sweat House, and I'm guessing that somewhere up in there will probably be their burial grounds, if those have not been dug up. A lot of times people don't want to report these because they're afraid that it'll interfere in their businesses. But that only applies to property and landowners who have businesses who receive federal funding. And there's rules about how that works. The Stornettas did the same thing over on the coast with a lot of our stuff, blocking up the old caves and stuff. There was a cave from the lighthouse that went all the way over Kamatz and Kanaktai. Not many people know about that, but I do. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. I've been to that one you're talking about, and they're actually, at least the last time I was there, 15 years ago or so, there was a garden. People that lived in the area had put a garden right where the village size was. But you walk through the garden, and you would see chips and flakes and. I guess they had most of the points, but yeah.
And then
I know that site, yeah.
I don't know, I can't even remember the woman's name, but I have been in contact with this historical society probably about 10 years ago, and I met a woman who was born in Yorkville and said that Indians live with their family. And I was scheduled to interview her, and then COVID hit, and then everything, like the world went to hell for about 5 years. I'm not even sure how to reconnect with her again, but she told me that she even knew where that white horse was buried, that Effie used to ride bareback a white horse. And B knows about that too, where that horse is. It's buried somewhere out in Yorkville.
Where Aunt Violet took you.
Oh, and Violet was married to my Uncle Pat, so it's like...
That white horse. That's where Aunt Violet took you.
Yeah, a lot of these discoveries are just, I think, are best to be just not told to everybody about where these sites are sometimes. Burial grounds, things that are, you're not going to have a lot of openness about it, and I don't blame them one bit. I wouldn't either. This is something that's sacred to them and their families, and I think we should honor that as that's what we should think about when we talk. When we're just here talking about these families and they're real people with real feelings. We've got to remember that anything that they want or need at this point, I think, should not even be argued. I think they deserve the respect that they've long lost.
Hi, I have it right here for anybody who is interested, the 1954 Metzger map, and it shows the Sager piece. And I'll put it up there on the table when they're done, and you can just see exactly where it is in Yorkville.
If that's what they want.
You call it a puberty. I call it a baby rock. But that's. Should I say where it is? You mind?
It's just right when
No,
you're
I mean,
coming
is it okay
into
to tell everybody?
Boonville. It's over the field on the left-hand side.
Oh, I don't know about the one in Boonville. I know the one about on Fish Rock Road.
Oh, I know that one too.
Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, I think I'd like to direct this one to you. If we find anything, it feels like that should be locally transmitted. And so could people contact you if they find something to see if it stays in the valley?
Yeah, I think you could contact me and probably Sherry and maybe donate it to the museum here.
Cool.
So everybody could see and learn from whatever you find. Yeah.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, today I'm gonna gift Elizabeth and her family the last up pieces that I have. I found when I was a kid trout fishing or whatever I was doing. There's no reason for me to have that in my possession more. I want either everybody see it or whoever she wants. I have a grinding bowl of mortar pestle that I found that could have been used by some of your great grandparents. And I think that's the way to do it. On the Carlson site that happened down real quickly, I'll tell you a story. On the Mill Creek site, it's dated back to about 3,000, I think, 4,000 years ago. That it was first inhabited. That collection of was Thomas Layton did a dig there in the 80s, I believe. It was, matter of fact, it was her grandfather, Art, who was digging the trench for the foundation of the house. I was working with my dad, who was a builder, and I was a young kid. And he said, "Take a look at that, Jeff, right there." And there was a half of a obsidian spear, but only half of it. The other half had been dug away and dumped somewhere. And when we backfilled the trenches, we found the other half. And you can view that up in the Little Red Schoolhouse in the Pomo section up there. Anyway, I'm getting off point here. What I was trying to say was when Carlson, when they were done with the dig, they left the flakes and chips and artifacts that they'd found. Some, I believe, maybe had taken with him, but most of them were given to Carlson as a landowner. When he went to move away, he asked me if I would be interested in taking, since I was with it from the beginning. I said, no, I really don't think that putting it from one white man's drawer to another white man's drawer where people can't see them is not the thing to do. So what I wanted to have done, I said what you should have done is have the Pomo people come and do a ceremony and rebury it. Those kind of things are an option too. But like Elizabeth said, I think a donation to the Historical Society here, but catalog it. Write down where you found it. At least get that much so that we have an idea when these things come together, what it means.
I have a question. Did the Native Americans here in Anderson Valley make annual trips to the coast? They did.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very, very definitely, and that's the Zini Ranch shows that is a major site, a major village site of the connection between the coast and here. And I think I touched on this a little bit, that there was a lot of ongoing interaction between the Rancheria Indians of Yorkville with the coast Indians, and yeah, seaweed, all manner of food was gone for and come back. And we were talking about trails earlier, but I wanted to mention that there are still trails around. When an Indian had a trail, they stuck to that trail for thousands of years. And there are trails that have worked their way down into the earth, to great depths, and there are 2 or 3 of those here in the valley, at different places where there are old Indian trails that are just used so much that they're just way down there. They're just really low. So, yeah, no, they went all the time. And one other story about that, the natives from out there would come through here to go to the coast too on a regular basis. And I think Lori mentioned this a little bit about the one who didn't ask, but often they would build a fire up on the ridge up there to indicate that they would like to come through, giving the people that lived here notice that they were coming through and be okay. So, but yeah, no, that was an ongoing annual thing all the time. Yeah.
Limcolil, does that transfer or translate to place of big burnt tree?
I don't know that one.
Okay.
Latte is also a word that was never translatable.
Okay.
But Fish Rock and Ore Spring Road are our oldest trails.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
We have another question here.
Not a question, just a sorry. Dylan Williams, child member of MPA. I know Lori. So on wildfire incidents, I'm a reef, which is like an emergency response archaeologist, so to prevent CAL FIRE, U.S. Forest Service from destroying ARC sites. But my general rule of thumb is if you see something on the ground, just don't touch it. It's not yours. Leave it where it is. In an archaeological sense, there's a lot of data to be for like an artifact. There's three main things. It's like it's the context, the strata that the artifact is in that gives it. It could be 300 years old. It could be 3,000 years old. You can't really tell by looking at the rock, but you can tell by its context and where you found it. So if you see things coming outside the hill that aren't yours, just leave them. And if you're an archaeologist, document it. If you have to excavate that site, make sure you document it fully. But if you have artifacts at home that you've already taken out of their context, it would be really nice if you give them to a historical society.
And that's what I was referring to as well.
Give it back to the tribe.
Don't take stuff out of the ground if you find it now, but if you have stuff at home.
Yeah, if you have it, just kind of repatriate it. That's always really accepted, a really, really gracious thing to do for a travel perspective. Like, thank you for, letting us have our stuff back. And also, if you can help it, just please don't go seeking out these sites to take things from them, because it's fun to have arrowheads, because it destroys the history. It destroys the context for historical reasons.
Right.
Like I was saying, it could be 300 years old, it could be 30,000 years old. The only way you're gonna know that is by documenting it through with science.
Here.
So yeah,
Very much
that's my
agree.
opinion.
Yes.
So I know that different bands of different tribes have identifying colors or jewelry that they signify that we're friends and not enemies. So is there a particular color or whatever for the Pomo tribes? That's one part. And the other part, were there actually bands of Indians that came in that were not friendly to this area? Is there any recorded
Lori, that probably is best for you.
Those Puerto Rican people, we can't get along with no one. My coast people are just very, very difficult to get along with people.
You think
They
it's always
fought.
been that way?
Yeah. It was bad. They killed a man from Yorkville, and they didn't know what the hell to do about it. Because when you have an Indian on Indian crime, I mean, that's what, when you think about Kagama versus U.S., that's what happened up in Hoopa. An Indian killed another Indian. What do you do? They're not even citizens. What do you do? So that's what we came up with the Major Crimes Act as a result of Kagama versus, that was up in Hoopa. But that happened. Point Arena and Yorkville got along, but there were times that they didn't also. Hopland and Point Arena got along the most. Ukiah and Point Arena somewhat. Old Dam was our enemy. Mendocino, we fought like hell. My daughters, women, a lot of times women, and also violating rules about trespassing. A lot of people here in the valley have a lot of buckeyes that they would trade people with salt, and you need that salt to be able to salt your meats and prepare your skins to put them away. My husband used to do that. Everybody would bring roadkill to him because all the young people were scared. But yeah, they did fight. And that was also Stewart's Point and Point Arena had a war. They did fight. So I had one student in my class tell me that, oh no, Indians were peaceful people. We were, for the most part. But there were times like there was foul play when someone goes missing at the coast and they suspect that something happened. It was blood law, an eye for an eye. All right, you get to pick who's going to go. And that's how my daughter's great-great-great-great-grandpa went up to Mendocino and wiped out the chief up there at Bull Dam. They had a big war over that too. Stewart's Point and Point Arena had another big war. 27 perished in that war. And those are just the ones that we know about.
Right.
Oh, I do have a question on that. Is this pre-European presence, or now this is after the Europeans got here?
That's unknown.
Let me say that the Carlson Mill Creek thing, that we have lots of artifacts here and drawers of artifacts. That goes back 5,000 years. One of the things that was stated in the archaeological report was that there was no evidence of any weapons of war or any anything that indicated any warlike or fighting or anything, a changing of cultures. That is in the face of what I'm just finding out. This is basically just new information to me, and the archaeologists might want to say something to this, but they talk about the chert. They find chert and obsidian points and scrapers and everything. That the chert is referred to as pre-Pomoan and Yukian. And so that would indicate that we had both here and in Zini Ranch, where the two archaeological sites are, that the chert chips are identifying Yuki people, and the obsidian is identifying when the Pomos got here, and that happened about 2,000 years ago when the obsidian started showing up, according to the hydration method of dating. And but if you go back to the report, it says there was no evidence of any kind of fighting. In other words, it seemed like a peaceful takeover from Yukian to Pomo. And that's what I would assume that happened 2,000 years ago, or 2,500 years ago.
And we talk about the obsidian that was found. I know that when I was a kid, the valley is just littered with chips, and I found some of the obsidian I found here was cloudy or opaque. It wasn't clear like the glass kind from Clear Lake, and I was told that came from St. Helena. Now that's quite a trek for a trade. So I think a lot of this mutual respect of coming into each other's areas and making these trades were a matter of life and death probably. So maybe it was just kind of the coastal area had some troubles, but I don't know, like you say, I don't think the Anderson Valley has that much evidence of it. Can't say for sure because we weren't there. But what we do have is what we've told you here today.
Yeah, there was Hopland's one of the few people who had actually a ward captain.
Captain, that's a word.
They had a ward captain that they actually voted and elected. We're the only group of Pomo people who do that. And this is pre-contact because the Point Arena Stewart's Point War took place out at where the lighthouse is. That was our old village site. And they started sharpening up. They had a war dance out there that night because the Stewart's Point people had jumped our chief. And so we went down there to retaliate. And it was my daughter's great-great-great-great-grandpa, Harvey James' father, Billy James, and his brother. I got Billy James' stories from 1906, archived documents from UC Berkeley. That's where I first got my idea to do all this research. But they said that they actually had a war dance that night in Point Arena, and they went down and they found them, and they got them and fought them at Sea Ranch, Black Point. And they started sharpening up their obsidian arrowheads and getting ready for war and fighting over who was going to actually take the guy out
And
because they had stripped him of all of his clothing and of his beads, and he ran back buck naked from Anchor Bay all the way to the lighthouse. And when he hit Rollerville, he screamed "Holy hell!" one of those death-curdling screams that you know that somebody had just died. And the whole people, all my people out at Malala or out at the lighthouse, all got riled up and were ready to fight, and they did. And they went down to Stewart's Point that night and got them about 3 a.m. And that story was told in 3 different ways. Okay. And then my cousin, who just passed away, my dad's first cousin, his name was Dwayne Potter. He used to pitch. He told me that story. I just wanted to test it out, and he almost word for word. He said, my grandpa told me that story, and his grandfather's connected because the parishes from Point Arena are actually from Yorkville. The mom was from Yorkville. They were raised in Yorkville, didn't go to the coast till they were adults. So that's why when I look through all of this work, I tend to look at the people who know the most about something. And so for the people who are like sort of latecomers into the area, who don't know the history and stories of that land and that landscape, I noticed that there tends to be a difference in that.
But Anderson Valley didn't ever have any big wars or anything going on.
No, the people left and they got absorbed into other tribal groups.
That's exactly the word.
And so there's a lot of Yorkville Indians. There's about 1,000 that I can count. All the Billies and all the Knights. Oh my God. Just us alone's probably 500. And that's not including the parishes, Marufos. Oh my God. You're talking 1,000 at least. Just because we don't see a reservation doesn't mean that there's not a people from there. It just didn't get organized. Just like Potter Valley. Some places had fires and everybody scattered to the wind and had to go look for work elsewhere. Things like that.
Well, what a wonderful afternoon. Wow, wow. Thank you all.
I gotta just say that a lot of stuff that we're talking about and a lot of fighting and stuff, it's in that Indian Summer book. I'll tell you, I've already mentioned it's not perfect. It's not perfect. But if you can read it with a skeptical mind, you'll still learn a lot, I think.
That's Yorkville, you know, and we actually have the book here, and it is for sale. So I think with that, thank you. Oh, yes.
So I wanted to say one more thing. My friend Morgan Bainham. He was really good friends with my grandma Lila and Art, and they lived on the same place, well, around the same area in Philo, Lemons Market Courtyard area. My grandparents had to move from there from living there for so long. They ended up moving across from Jack's Valley store, but I think they were still in the property, and they had to completely leave the valley at the end for their lives. They moved to Clear Lake, and so that was really sad and very upsetting that there was no place for us here permanently. Just so that's something to think about.
We're back now.
I'm going to make a closing. I was thinking about this, and then I thought I wouldn't. But some years ago, I got invited to go up to a bear ceremony by a local Konkaumaidu man that's a very, very good friend of mine. And when I was up there, I was surprised to run into her grandfather, Art Knight. It turns out his wife, Isla, was Konkaumaidu, and they were up there. And I learned a song up there. They were gambling. They were doing the hand game gambling, and there was a good luck song that they sang that I learned from Art and the others that were singing it. And I kind of think of it as, it's a good luck gambling song, but I think of it as a good luck in everything song. And I'm going to sing that song. Hey, nickety, hey, wana, hey, nickety awana, atsa matsa owana, atsa matsa owana. Hey nickety awana, hey nickety awana, atsa matsa owana, atsa matsa owana. They would sing that over and over again. Are you familiar with that song? I think it's all of California. I think, you know.